staff for years, and then definitely.
Like that. So first of all, I want to thank everybody. I see some familiar faces. You know, it's always worried when you present to people who know you, just sitting there next to them in services, and now all of a sudden you're entertaining like that. But my name is Elliot King. I'm a professor at Loyola University, Maryland, and I feel so different. The last one was like Maimonides, and that was like very old school, and he wrote on the wrote on the board and stuff like that. Gave handouts, killed trees, all that kind of stuff. We're just going to this. So what I'm going to do today is.
Shalom, everybody. We're ready for session 2.
Yeah, we're ready.
Session 2 now begins. A 1.5 hour session.
I just want to feel like he's the principal.
Yeah. It's gotta give everybody a role, right? Now he's going to give us the lunch and then next.
Right.
But so what I'm going to do today, first of all, I'm going to talk at a really high pace because it's only half an hour, and I'm trying to crunch time, and I want to leave room for everybody to get their word in as well, or some questions like that. I'm going to try to get everybody to think about news just in a little bit different way than you might have thought about it before, and sort of bring to you the professional definition of news versus the way we really understand it, and get you to think about that a little different. Think about news in public life, the role it plays, and why it's so important, why these arguments about news actually are really significant and they're good to have. And then I want to talk a little bit about news and its audiences, who consume news, where news comes from, and why, and the situation that we actually face today. So anyway, you know, news is important. News has always been important. We'll talk about that. It's an ongoing feature of human life. If you go back all the way, that's from the beginning, from Marathon, where he races 25 miles to say, oh, so-and-so beat so-and-so at such and such. I never could remember. If I had my presenter, I have it written down, but I don't have that, so I can't remember. And then he drops dead, and now we honor that with marathons. News has always been important. It's critical. And the way that professionally news is always being defined, and if you have studied journalism professionally, you know its impact, prominence, proximity, timeliness, and that defines news as an object, as something out there for us to ascertain, to assess. And the problem with that is that means news is a professional judgment. We can argue, I decide this is news, you don't think it's news. And you have the big argument, is this news or is this not news? And the way that argument always comes up in public life is in bias. Bias is always the argument that what you've decided to report as news is not really news. And it reflects your bias, and that's why you did that. And that's why the same news media from liberals is always biased to the conservative side. And from conservatives is always biased to the liberal side. Because all they're arguing is, and by the way, just because one side says it's conservative and the other side says it's liberal and they both say it's biased, doesn't mean it's down the middle. Doesn't mean that it's not biased. It might be biased either way. You don't know. It means is that there's different news judgment that's going on. And by the way, just parenthetically, I like to add here is when you're reporting and when some guy who's a liberal columnist says, this is what conservatives think, you might as well stop reading right there, because this is what I as a liberal think conservatives think. On the flip side, when a conservative said, this is what liberal think, this is what I as a conservative am going to pretend that liberals think. So that's all a question of perspective. But when you have news as an object out there, then it's professional news judgment that defines on what's going on there. So I want you to think of something as an alternative. And that news is always an argument. News is always a claim. Oops. Sorry about that. News. Yeah. You overload. If I was really cool, I'd just take it right now, you know, but instead I'm going to turn it off. Oops, it didn't turn off. I want to turn it off. It doesn't want to turn it off. I know. Now I'm going to be disconnected for like 20 minutes. How am I going to do that? Like that. So anyway, what I want to say is news is a social relationship. News is a claim that you should pay attention to this. This is important. And the reason I like that is because that scales. Because we all know we have family news. Somebody comes home, your kid comes home. this is important, and it goes up. And what that claim is of importance depends on the context, family, city, state, country, world, that kind of thing, the sender and the receiver. So that's really important, who's generating that news and who's receiving that news. And we care about news. We always want to know. And the reason we care about news, most of all, because the world is a very scary place. And we always want to know what's around the corner. And are people going to be coming and attacking us and doing bad things and causing us harm? Is our climate, I don't know about you, but I've been reading the New York Times and they got me on climate change. Oh my goodness. The whole question is it going to be 3 feet or 10 feet and stuff like that. Fortunately, Owings Mills, I think, is on a hill, so I don't think the harbor's going to come all the way up to us. I don't know. But we're social. We want to know what's going on, what other people are doing, what's going on, and that's obviously celebrity news, but that's always been the case, what's going on in the court and stuff like that. People like to be entertained, like to be amused. Fortunately, things like executions used to be amusing to people, and deformities used to be amusing and that kind of thing. There's a big world. This is really one of the things I reflect about a lot, that what's going on in South Sudan or in Nigeria. That's like, why is that newsworthy to us? That's like really far away. Boko Haram is not coming here, I don't think, and stuff like that. But yet it's newsworthy. Yet we're interested. We attend, or how about that airplane that went down and CNN just covered that on a nonstop basis, and then all their ratings shot through the roof. There was zero facts there. We still don't know what happened. It was aliens. I mean, that's all. That's the only rational explanation. They sucked it into outer space, and over in Lot 56, they're hiding that for us because that's too scary. It's the same people who set up Stonehenge, I'm pretty sure. But the real reason that we want to talk about it is, and what we're going to talk a little bit about here, is that news equals power. The control of information equals control of your society. And we know this because the first thing that totalitarian countries do is control information. It used to be Soviet Union was big, now China. China is the greatest censor of, they pioneered technology to censor information. And we know that because if you let information go out, we saw what happened to the Russians, right? As soon as they said, we're going to have a little free speech, the first thing they said is, we don't want you guys in power anymore, we want somebody else. And now they're shutting that down. So news always is designed, there's been an ongoing, and I'm not going to go through the whole history of news here, but it's always been based on technology, always. The more better communication, transportation technology you got, the bigger your scope of news is. So as soon as you get roads and regular postal service, all of a sudden you get little newsletters and stuff like that. And I don't know if anybody's ever read a book called The Coffee Trader by this guy, David Liss. It's a wonderful book about early capitalism in Amsterdam. And they're all communicated by letters, and you can get the beat on the market, and you can front runner on trade and stuff like that. And that's always but the big game changer is the printing press. All of a sudden you can really distribute news widely. I'm talking like 500 copies or 1,000 copies and that kind of thing. But once you get the printing press going, all of a sudden everybody immediately understands that public opinion is important to government. And so the first thing we get is this English Civil War called the War of the Pamphlets, and the Royalists and the parliamentarians, the criminalists, are all printing pamphlets, and they're all killing each other for what they do and stuff like that. But all right in from the 1600s on, we know that public opinion and the spread of information is going to be important in the way we govern ourselves. Just by the way, historical fact. So in the 1600s, there was a revolution in England, right? And they chopped off the head of the king, Charles. And what do they call that? They call that Glorious Revolution. In the 1700s, there was a revolution in France, chopped off the head of the king. What do they call that? Reign of Terror. I don't know, you figured that out. But the winners write history, right? But we'll go on. So anyway, coming out that experience in the 1600s, when we set up the United States, they know exactly how important free press is. And so that's been institutionalized in the United States, of course. They have to have a free press, the right to know. And that's what we're talking about now. What do we know? We have the right to know, but what do we actually know, and what happens? And this is why, when Dr. Mankin also was talking about, when he talks to students about these issues, but there's a whole counter-argument to the free press, right? And that counter-argument is people are stupid. And why do you want stupid people have the right to know, or have the right to vote, or have that? And you say, oh, that's kind of harsh, but that was kind of like Plato's position, right? That we should be ruled by the philosopher kings. I always point out that there is a country ruled by philosopher kings, Iran, and I don't think we want to go that direction, really. But why should people who are uneducated, who have not studied the issues, who are dilettantes, who are easily swayed, who give in to their passions, why should they be able to participate? And our faith is because even with the participation of everyone, multitude of tongues, you're ultimately going to come out to a better solution. That's the faith. That's a tenet of faith. That may or may not be right, but that's a tenet of faith. So now I want to talk a little bit. That's the basis of news that we talked about. It's a social relationship. It's a claim on what's important, and who gets to distribute that claim has a lot of power in society. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but with improvement in printing technology, there's an explosion of sources, and with the growth of industrialization in cities, in a lot of cities there's a lot of different newspapers, and people read a lot of different newspapers. I'm not saying that they're more well-rounded, they were more partisan, they were just as narrow in what they want, but there was a lot more potential to come across more different points of view. In 1910, people read 3.2 newspapers. Those newspapers are all local. There's no real, there's some interaction between them, but it's primarily local. And the really big ones, the ones we care about, are almost all urban, and it's a lot different out in the countryside. But then in the 50s, and this is where we remember as kids. This was an unusual moment in time when all of a sudden there was 3 dominant sources of news: ABC, NBC, and CBS. We all watched the same thing. As a matter of fact, there's a good argument, I'm not going to make it here, but there's a good argument to be made that that's when we actually got America, in the 1950s. If you look, all the regional differences start going away. All the regional department stores start going away. You have Nordstrom's. Nordstrom's used to be in the Northwest, and then you have all Nordstrom's. You have McDonald's. All those, the songs we have in common are all television jingles, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a very good argument to be made along those lines. But one thing we know is, at one time, in this moment, for the first time, we could all attend to the same thing at the same time. And that was hugely powerful. And that's why everybody was all upset. The networks are liberal or they're conservative, because everybody understood how important that was. Everybody understood it, that the networks were also regulated. So if there was one moment in time where news media was really down the middle, was when the 3 networks dominated, because they were regulated. They had to, by law, be even-handed. And if not, you could lose your license. So the First Amendment, by the way, does not apply to television. Television is regulated and has always been regulated because politicians are, for all how stupid we say they are, they're actually really smart, and they understood that if one side or the other begins to dominate, now they do away with that. Oh, and then the whole world is watching. When they say the whole world is watching, I just bring up these iconic figures that I don't even have to explain them to but to my students, I always have to say, Kennedy, Nixon, okay. And you see, that's his beard. That's what lost his in the election, right? But we'll go on like that. But and that immediately ends. That's a period from the mid-1950s to the mid-1980s. In 1987, they do away with the 1985 or 86, they do away with the fairness doctrine, the regulation that says if you give one side, you have to give the other side. And in 1987, guess who we get? Rush Limbaugh. Immediately, as soon as we get it, immediately starts to fragment, first in radio, and then that, and then in cable TV. And as we all know, MSNBC was a total afterthought until they decided we're going to be the liberal counterpart to Fox. Fox has pioneered TV with conviction, and they've done a big job, good job, in sort of moving away into that fragmentation. But that's nothing to what we got now, and what, not me personally, and probably not many of the in the group, but certainly students and people in their 20s and 30s and stuff like that, they don't care about MSNBC or any of that. What they care about is what's coming on through social media. And even myself, I have to admit it. And so on the one hand, they have access to a lot more voices. Everybody can have a website. Everybody can have a blog, can do this and do that. But you listen and then you pick out. And so I have my own personalized news feed, which is a combination of, the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and blogs and individual people and Sarah Palin. And I follow her because I'm doing a study on Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin's an interesting character. She was a public figure for 2 years with never talking to the press. The press just watches her news feed and then plucks out quotes that they like from that. But, Kim Kardashian, whoever it is, you have a whole, but my news feed and your news feed are completely different. We have nothing in common anymore in terms of news, except a big story will come through and we'll all click back, maybe. Maybe we'll all click back. But it's all personalized. I don't even know who Heather Hatton is. That's somebody retweeted something else, but I don't know what that is. So, and that's where it's going, is we all have these personalized news feed. So what's the problem with that? Who cares? And the problem is, the more information you actually have access to, the less you actually pay attention to. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is called the Google effect, and which is if you search for something, you will just look at the top search returns and won't go farther than that. But in looking for the top search returns, that makes them come up as the top search returns for other people. So this has happened in scientific literature, that the 10 or 15 or 20 most quoted articles are the 10 or 15 or 20 most quoted articles, and everything else is trailing away. Because it used to be, for those of you who've been in graduate school, know you used to read an interesting article, you'd go to the footnotes, and you go through all the footnotes. But now you go to Google Scholar, and the top articles show up, and it narrows. That's number one. Of course, the more information that's accessible, the more incorrect information that's accessible. And you don't even know it's correct or incorrect. And there's a battle, like with the Wikipedia, there's people struggling back and forth. Who gets to say the definitive word in anything? Nobody. Nobody. And then, the more choice there is, the harder it is to choose. So I don't know really, who should I actually be listening to? Who should I actually be listening to? And there's a really good book. This is more about shopping. If you think about it, you go to the cereal aisle, and there's from there to there, cereal. How do you know which ones? Everybody just picks out the same 3 that they always do. Nobody really goes, oh, well, I try something. No, this is the granola I get, and I don't want any of those other 50 other choices. I don't care. But it's hard to make that choice. You have to actually, the more choice, the harder it is to make choice. And the other thing is, there's a lot of things, as all that information as it becomes accessible to us, and we choose, we listen less and less to the other side. Actually, it's actually a little worse than that. It's a little worse than that. There is evidence, a study just came out, that we do encounter the other side as we go get information off the web and that kind of thing. We just don't believe the other side. As a matter of fact, in a very depressing study by the University of Michigan, if you approach somebody who has a deeply held view with facts that contradict that view, they just dig into that view harder. They just stay, entrench themselves. They entrench themselves deeper into that view. So there's some research that shows as you surf around and encounter views that you disagree with, that just reinforces your disagreement with those views. There's very little sort of open-endedness. Oh, that's an interesting idea. That happens. As a matter of fact, I remember when I said, I'm never going to watch any of those talking heads shows anymore where, one side and the other side and they go like that, until one person, one time, it doesn't have to, somebody would say something and then the other person goes, oh, I never thought of that. Good, because it doesn't. The whole part of that entertainment is just for this side to reinforce this side, so they can say, oh, the other side's idiots, and this side can reinforce that side to say the other side's idiots. And the more choice, the easier it is to do that kind of thing. So why don't we look at more, why aren't we more studious, why aren't we more even-handed? There's a lot of psychological reasons that I don't want to get into right now. But main thing that people claim is we're too busy. We're too busy. But the fact is, we have more leisure time now than we've ever had before. We fill up our leisure time. We used to fill it up with television and watch a lot of television, but now we know what we fill it up with. Not this company, but everybody else, fill it up with this. And everybody, because I gotta turn it on to see what's going on. Right now, you're not allowed. It's actually impolite now to have 1 free second effort. You stand in line and watch. Go ahead.
It's so interesting what you're saying. I have a retail store. We have a sign on our door that says, please respect blah, 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 and we turn their cell phone off and try not to bring food in here.
Right.
Everybody that walks in that store walks in with a cell phone and they talk all around the store as if this doesn't. They'll stand there while you're, it's unbelievable to me, the sense of entitlement that has come with this, and this need to be connected. And everybody's in a hurry. I gotta go.
Yeah, exactly.
I gotta go. It is, I've been doing this for so many years, and I see such a difference now, and it's just, between that and the fact that the internet's gonna put all of us retailers out of business in a few years, that's the other piece of this.
Yeah, well,
Right.
that's another talk.
That's another
talk,
Yeah.
exactly
Right,
right.
I mean, it's amazing.
That's right. That is so true, and it's almost impolite to be standing there in the line without your head like that. Just to wait in line somewhere. Nobody could do that. Jump through the roof. Go
I
ahead.
think it actually limits civility. We're not civil to each other.
What's rude?
That is a
And
important point.
disrespectful, because to stand while you're conducting a transaction and then moving your attention to something else in the middle of it automatically indicates that that's not important anymore. I got something more important to do, and that person just standing there. That's manners.
I think you're right.
But aren't we really not getting as much as we used to, or the same type that we used to, because of what you said about, I personalize all these feeds, so I only have so much time in the day to do anything, let's say, even if I do nothing else but read, I'm only going to absorb so much information. If I have all this stuff that I might never have seen before, compared to the standard news that used to come to me that was, regulated, I knew everything before that everybody knew. Now I only know what I want to know, and I know nothing else because I filtered it out.
That's true, and you also, not only that, you only know it in 140 character bytes because all you have is a headline service. They used to disrespect USA Today because they had really short, they used to say USA Today will never win a Pulitzer Prize because they don't give a Pulitzer Prize out for the best paragraph of the year. Paragraph is now long story. A whole paragraph, 150 words, that's a lot. Because not only do we have this wider thing, and we're mixing Rwanda with Kim Kardashian, and that's been a long-term complaint. I don't want to say that. That goes back to like Life magazine of this mix between all these different things, but you have the potential to mash up so many different things, but that's it. You're just scrolling through it.
And the other fallout from that is that there's less and less common ground.
Exactly. So that's how we'll go. Thank you so much. The mass audience for news is broken down. In other words, we don't share the same information. We don't even agree on the facts anymore because we're getting these facts from these selective sources we're not paying attention because we feel like, oh my God, we gotta scroll, we gotta scroll, we gotta scroll, we gotta scroll. With my students, it's really amazing. I give them my cell phone. I say, if you have any problem, call me on my cell phone. I do that because they will never call me, never. But they'll send me a text, which is good, and that's good, and I text them back. They won't call each other. They don't like to talk to each other face to face. It's too uncontrolled.
I think you're missing something. There's no reason to be ignorant anymore.
There's no
reason to be ignorant anymore. You can choose not to be informed. Because, by way of example, you talked about Twitter. Well, yeah, Twitter only has 140 characters. But within that 140 characters, you can have a short link to a CBO report. You can have a short link to a paper. You have something like PLOS, okay, which is an open source, if you will, series of papers on scientific properties. And there's a real issue as to whether you should continue to publish in
Right.
paywall block publications.
Right.
But by and large, paywall block publications are going to erode and they're going to disappear. Over time, you're going to have access to all these things. So, in a sense, this golden age of newspapers, I'm not enamored of, because all they had were stories, but you didn't get the backstory. You couldn't pick a story out and do any research in depth. That's not true now. In fact, one of my major objections to some online news services is they'll publish a story and they'll say the court in this case said X, Y, Z. Well, give us a link to the court opinion so I can find what the court said.
You put your hand on the core irony of what's going on. There's more information available, and as more becomes available, more people pay attention to less. And that's the core irony. They don't have to. It's not baked into the cake in the technology. It's how the technology has been used.
I think there's two things too. I think one, at certain grade levels, a large majority of young people have not been taught how to think about two things. They don't know, they're taught facts, this, that, but they're not taught how to look at two different things and make opinions, or to look at two sides and realize that there's two sides. They're not like this new type of teaching, which is called, where they're trying to teach kids to be more core curriculum.
Critical thinking.
Critical. The other thing, which I think comes out of all this, which is worse, and I saw this even in Scouts years ago, is that once everybody puts down electronic devices, a large number of people do not know how to communicate with each other face to face.
Exactly. Yeah, if you want to read a really depressing book, read something called Alone Together by Sherry Turkle, who talks about, and this is not kids. Let's not put it on kids. She's talking about people, boards of directors meetings, where they're talking about the future of their public company, and what are they doing? They're emailing and texting under the table. They're not paying attention. They're not paying attention. So that's the irony. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say in this talk, is that there is fragmentation. There doesn't have to be fragmentation. That's the irony of it.
It seems like one of the societal dangers of all of this is that it becomes easier and easier to control not necessarily a particular portion of the population, but groups of people, let's say, with out-and-out lies, because you spew them out and there is no filter, there is no check anywhere. You can have a Twitter feed and say anything, and there are going to be people who follow you and believe you, and that's the end of it.
And not only that, if you challenge those beliefs from outside that tribe or outside that identification or outside that group, they just say, we don't believe you. I mean, to us, it probably seems insane that people think that climate change is a conspiracy of liberal scientists who want to destroy the American way of life.
Yeah, but I know some extraordinarily well-educated people who believe that nonsense.
That it's a liberal science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, or close, or something close to it.
That's right. And so we probably think that's crazy, and probably if you confront those folks and say, you're insane. There's 99% of scientists agree on this. Why would they do that? That's not going to change. That's not going to change their view. It's not going to change their view.
That's what the Michigan
You
State.
can always tell them, if you ever notice, the Coast Guard never has their bases right on the water. It's always several blocks back.
Goodness.
But, so what I'm trying to present, I'm out of time, even though Paul he hasn't rung the bell yet, so we get to go, is that's exactly right. What's happened is with this plethora, with this explosion of information and this availability to access information, in the way it's been wrapped up, is we actually access less information, we're actually more narrow in our sources, and it doesn't have to be that way, it's what we've done to ourselves.
So where do you see it going in 5 years?
5 to 10 years. I don't really, I think it's all gonna be on our phone, but I think we're gonna, I think we're gonna come to some sort of crisis at some point. and
Because I
we're
think
gonna,
that's the
like,
question. I
Yeah.
think, we all know where it's going in some ways, or where it's flowing. The question is, where is it going to be in 5 to 10 years? It is, how is it going to cycle back, which I am presuming it will.
Yeah, I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna reach some sort of crisis, political crisis, and at some point, we're gonna share we'll have some mechanism to reestablish some sort of common ground, because I think the polarization has gotten so extreme. This is my own my own sort of naive kind of thing. I think the polarization at the elite level is much greater than the polarization among the rest of us, that I think that there's actually much more harmony on really critical issues. If you just see what's going on with gay marriage and the way that's just sweeping across, it was a wedge issue. And I think a lot of wedge issues are going away, and at some point those are going to have to resolve themselves.
Yeah,
I
I
think.
think perhaps that's, we've talked about all the negatives, but there are some positives that come out of this.
Huge positives. Like I think we got much wider agreement than ever before.
Absolutely.
Of course, I think the reason for that is, I don't do Twitter and I don't do Facebook, but I think it's because of a lot of the young people who are on those formats are on a different wavelength
That's correct.
than the politicians and everybody else. I think they are more in line with each other.
And 5 years from now, we can't predict what new technology is going to pop up, what new app, what new whatever, which is going to change the way we think again about this whole structure.
Do you see 25 to 40-year-olds seeing the same concerns that you're expressing here, or do they find this
They find this as a business as usual. I think they look at this in the same way we looked at television. It was like, this is what we knew,
Maybe look
and-
at it as a bit of a crisis here, a concern, and I would say that 25 to 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds think this is the way it is.
Yeah, they think, absolutely, business as usual. Anyway, thank you so much.